It was one of those calm, golden afternoons when everything seemed to stand still. The kind of day where even the dust in the sunlight looked lazy. The faint hum of the vacuum cleaner filled the quiet living room as Emma moved slowly, rhythmically, wiping down the wooden shelves and straightening the family photos that lined the mantelpiece. She had done this 100 times before. This was Laura's house, her best friend's, a warm, lived-in home that always smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. Emma often came by to help tidy up when Laura worked late shifts or ran errands. It was her small way of repaying a friendship that had lasted since childhood, a bond that had seen both laughter and heartbreak. On the coffee table sat a half-finished puzzle that Ben, Laura's 10-year-old son, had been working on. Emma smiled softly, brushing a crumb from the edge of the table. "Almost there, champ," she murmured, though he wasn't around to hear it. She had grown fond of the boy, quiet, curious, with the same bright eyes his mother once had before life had dimmed them a little. Outside, the wind rattled faintly against the window, carrying the scent of rain. Emma paused for a moment, looking out. The street was empty. A cat darted across the road, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 3 times. It was peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Emma turned back toward the couch, humming under her breath, a melody she couldn't quite remember the name of. She had just picked up a framed photo when she noticed something strange. The picture showed Laura and Ben at last year's Christmas party, both smiling in matching sweaters, but something was missing. She remembered being there, laughing, holding the camera in one photo and standing next to Laura in another. But in this frame, where she was sure she had been, there was only empty space beside Laura. Just air. She frowned, blinking as though that might change the picture. Maybe Laura had swapped it out. Maybe she was imagining things. She shrugged, shaking off the chill that crept up her spine. The front door creaked suddenly, the sound slicing through the quiet like a knife. Emma turned sharply, a bit startled, the photo frame still in her hand. There, standing in the doorway, was Ben. His small figure was framed by the fading daylight behind him. His hair was messy, his school bag half-zipped, and his little hands were clutching something, a crumpled piece of paper. "Hey, Benny," Emma said with her usual warmth, setting the frame down. "You're home early. I thought you were going with your mom to the store." He didn't answer. The boy just stood there, frozen, his eyes wide and glassy, the kind of look children get when they've seen something they can't quite process. Emma took a few steps forward, her voice softening. "Hey, you okay, sweetheart?" Ben's lips trembled. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, shaking, uncertain. "Aunt Emma, why are you here?" Emma blinked, confused. "What do you mean, honey?" "I'm just," Ben interrupted, his voice breaking slightly. "Mom said you died yesterday." The words hit her like a sudden blow to the chest. For a moment, she just stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. The glass she'd been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing through the silent room. Her heart pounded in her ears. She looked at Ben, at the raw fear in his eyes, and felt a coldness wash over her, something deep, unnatural. "Ben," she whispered, her voice trembling. That's not funny." But Ben didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just shook his head slowly. "Mom was crying," he said softly. "The police came. They said your car. It went off the road." The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal, as the clock on the wall ticked louder. 1 second at a time, while the world Emma thought she knew began to quietly, invisibly, fall apart. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grab, impossible to breathe through. "Mom said you died yesterday." Emma stood frozen, staring at Ben as though the world had tilted off its axis. She tried to laugh, to dismiss it, but The sound that came out of her throat didn't sound like laughter at all. It was thin, fragile, trembling. "Sweetheart," she said carefully, forcing a smile. "That's a terrible thing to joke about." Ben shook his head. "I'm not joking," his voice cracked. "Mom said the car fell into the river. They couldn't—" He trailed off, eyes flicking to the window as though afraid something might be watching. Emma's chest tightened. The air suddenly felt heavier, colder. She turned toward her purse on the counter, reaching for her phone. Her hands were shaking now. Maybe Laura's playing some weird prank, she thought. Or maybe Ben overheard something and misunderstood. She pressed the power button on her phone. Nothing. The screen stayed black. She held it closer, pressed again. No response. The battery couldn't be dead. She had just charged it that morning. That was when she noticed the faint sound. A low static hum, not from the phone, but from everywhere. The air itself seemed to buzz. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again. "Ben," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "Where's your mom?" "She went to the police station," he said softly, "to give them your picture." Emma swallowed hard, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. "My picture?" Ben nodded. "They said they needed it for the report." Emma backed away slowly, her eyes darting around the room. Something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. She looked at the walls, at the photos again. There were fewer than before. The one on the mantel, the Christmas photo, was gone. Just an empty frame sitting crookedly where it had been moments ago. She blinked hard. "No," she whispered to herself. "No, no, no." The sound of the ticking clock grew louder, faster. Every tick seemed to echo through her skull. She turned toward the hallway mirror, and for a split second, she froze. Her reflection was there, but not right. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent, and behind her, she could swear she saw the faint shimmer of water trickling down her shoulder like rain. She spun around. The room was dry. Nothing there. Her breathing quickened. "Okay, Emma," she murmured. "You're just tired. You've been cleaning too long. You need to sit down." She moved toward the couch, but as she did, the static grew louder, morphing into faint whispers. They were coming from somewhere nearby. She looked around desperately until her eyes landed on the phone again. It was still dark, but the speaker was hissing faintly. Then, through the static, came a voice, her own. "You shouldn't be here, Emma." The phone slipped from her trembling hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. Ben gasped softly. "Aunt Emma?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the reflection of tears forming in his eyes. He wasn't lying. He wasn't confused. He was scared of her. Emma backed away, her mind spinning. The whispers had stopped. The clock had stopped. The whole house seemed to be holding its breath. She reached out for the photo frame again, desperate for something normal, but this time, when her fingers brushed the glass, her reflection didn't move. It just stared back. The silence was broken only by Ben's trembling voice. "Mom said if you ever came back." "It means you haven't said goodbye yet." The words sent a shiver down Emma's spine. The truth was no longer hiding. It was circling her, waiting to be seen. Emma sank onto the couch, her knees weak. The room felt colder now, not just cold, but empty, as if the air itself had been drained of warmth. Ben's words echoed in her head like a heartbeat. "Mom said if you ever came back." "It means you haven't said goodbye yet." She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to steady herself. Her mind was racing, refusing to accept what her heart already knew. Something was wrong, not with Ben, not with Laura, but with her. For the first time, she looked at her own hands. The skin seemed pale, too pale. The veins beneath were faint blue lines that almost shimmered in the light. And when she turned her wrist, for the briefest second, she saw water drip from her fingertips and vanish before hitting the floor. Her breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes. And then the memories began to come down at first, just flashes. The road, wet and slick from rain. Headlights cutting through the dark. The sound of tires skidding, her hands gripping the steering wheel, the scream of twisting metal. The world turning upside down. Then the water, cold, endless, filling her lungs as she tried to breathe. The faint reflection of the moon rippling above her before everything faded into black. Her heart stuttered. Her eyes flew open, tears welling up. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be real." But deep down, she knew it was. Ben watched her from across the room, silent and small, his wide eyes filled with something far too old for a child, sorrow. He held on to that crumpled piece of paper she'd noticed earlier. Slowly, he walked forward and held it out. "I found this," he said softly. Emma hesitated, then took it. It was damp, wrinkled. A photograph. Her photograph. Her driver's license picture, edges torn, water-stained. Across the top, written in Laura's shaky handwriting, were the words, "In loving memory, Emma Grace Holloway." Her throat tightened. Where did you get this?" Ben bit his lip. "Mom made it for the frame. For your picture." He looked down, voice trembling. "We were going to put flowers next to it." The room spun around her. She gripped the table to keep from falling, but her hand slipped through the edge, not over it, through it. Like mist, like smoked out, she stumbled back, breathing fast. No, this isn't happening." Ben reached out as if to comfort her, but his hand passed through hers for a brief, icy second. His eyes went wide and tears spilled down his cheeks. "Aunt Emma," he cried, "please don't go." The words stopped her cold. Don't go. She wanted to stay. She wanted to hold him, to tell Laura she was okay, to undo whatever had happened. But as she looked down at herself, the truth glowed through every part of her. She didn't belong here anymore. Her voice broke. I can't feel anything," she whispered. "I thought I was just tired, but..." Ben sniffled. "Mom said you'd come back because you loved us too much to leave." Emma's tears fell silently. "She's right," she said, voice trembling. "I wasn't ready to say goodbye." The clock on the wall, which had stopped earlier, began to tick again, slow, steady, like a heartbeat. But it wasn't counting time anymore. It was counting moments. The air shimmered faintly. The scent of lavender, Laura's favorite, filled the room. Emma looked toward the front door, suddenly sensing that something was waiting. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was the other side. But before she could move, before she could take that final step, she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside, tires crunching over gravel. Lavra was home, and Emma knew. She only had a few moments left. The soft rumble of tires broke the silence. Headlights swept across the curtains as Laura's car pulled into the driveway. Emma turned toward the window, heart pounding with emotions she couldn't name, hope, fear, love, and the unbearable ache of goodbye. Ben wiped his tears quickly and whispered, "Mom's home." The front door opened with a slow creak. Lavra stepped inside, clutching her purse and a small bouquet of white lily. Her eyes were red, tired, the kind of eyes that had run out of tears but not pain. She froze when she saw Ben standing in the living room. And then her gaze drifted past him. Her breath caught. There was Emma, standing in the soft light, pale and still like a memory given shape. For a long, endless second, no one spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. The ticking clock was gone. The rain had stopped. "Emma?" Laura's voice trembled. Emma smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Hey, Laura." Laura's purse slipped from her hand, the lilies scattering across the floor. She covered her mouth, choking on a sob. No, it can't be." Emma shook her head gently. "I didn't mean to scare you." I didn't even know I was." She trailed off, glancing down at her faintly glowing hands. Gone. Lavra took a step forward, tears streaming freely now. "They said it was instant. They said you didn't suffer." Emma laughed softly, the sound fragile. "Maybe not, but it doesn't make leaving any easier." Ben stood between them, eyes wide, silent and trembling. He looked from one to the other, as if afraid that saying something might break the spell. Emma knelt down in front of him, her form flickering faintly. "Hey, kiddo." He sniffled, his voice breaking. "You can't go." She smiled through her tears. "I wish I could stay, Benny, but I think I already stayed longer than I was supposed to." He threw his arms around her, and for the briefest impossible moment, she felt it. The warmth. The love. The heartbeat of a little boy who had never stopped believing in her. She closed her eyes, memorizing it. When she opened them again, she was crying too. Laura knelt beside them, her hands shaking as she reached out, but her fingers passed through Emma's shoulder like smoke. "It's okay," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to hold me. Just remember me." Laura sobbed quietly. "I never stopped. I never will." The air shimmered, golden light spilling through the cracks of the curtains. The edges of Emma's figure began to blur, the color fading from her face like a watercolor washed in rain. "I just needed to see you both," she said softly. "To tell you that I'm okay. That I'm not scared anymore." Lavra wiped her eyes, trembling. "You were always the brave one." Emma smiled weakly. "You gave me something worth being brave for." Ben's small voice broke through the silence. "Will we see you again?" Emma looked at him, really looked, and said the only truth that mattered. "You'll see me every time you remember me. Every laugh. Every hug. I'll be there." The sunlight grew brighter, flooding the room in gold. Her outline flickered, translucent now, as she stood one last time. "Take care of each other," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." Lavra reached out instinctively, tears falling faster. Wait, but she was already fading, her voice soft as the wind. "Goodbye, my family." And then she was gone. The lily on the floor stirred in a sudden breeze, though the windows were closed. The scent of lavender filled the air, the same perfume Emma always wore. Lavra looked at Ben, her voice breaking. "She wasn't a dream, was she?" Ben shook his head, still staring at the space where Emma had been. "No, Mom. She just came home to say goodbye." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a voice only the heart could hear. "I'll always be here." And somewhere, just beyond the light, Emma finally found peace.